This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. A harsh critic of Republican budget cutting, Sister Simone Campbell says the GOP spending proposals fail the moral test. Foreign policy scholar and former Congressman Mike Barnes says if McCain had been elected president, we'd be in a new war every 3 weeks. And Bill Press talks with Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania about energy, the economy, and politics. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Sister Simone Campbell made a national splash a couple of years ago with her Nuns on the Bus campaign against Paul Ryan's budget proposals. Today, the Republican proposals are even worse, she says, because we are not taking care of the people Jesus cares about. And we say hello to Sister Simone Campbell, who's a Catholic sister in the Sisters of Social Service community. She's also the executive director of Network, a national Catholic social justice lobby, as well as the author of a new book, A Nun on the Bus, How All of Us Can Create Hope, Change, and Community. Sister Simone Campbell, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Oh, I'm so glad to be with you. Thanks for the invitation.
Oh, absolutely. It's great to have you back with us. You are among the leading Catholic voices associated with progressive politics, specifically in your bus tour opposing the Republican budget. But isn't this kind of involvement the same as when evangelical Protestants and others inject religion into politics from the right wing?
Well, I think we all bring our faith to politics. We all bring our values to politics. It just depends upon how clearly we speak about them or are willing to identify with them. But, I mean, in many ways, it is similar. I think one thing, though, that is different for me, that then, as I understand the right's perspective, is that for me it's the values of why I do what I do. But what I know profoundly is that not everyone needs to share my faith, and that in our pluralistic society where we do meet in the midst of all of this is not in faith, but it's in the Constitution, and it's we, the people of the United States. And our challenge in a democracy is to bring our various values into dialogue with each other. So, quite frankly, we need to be in dialogue with the right, the left, the center, those who want to drop out, everybody. We need to be in dialogue with 100%. And that's the value of our Constitution. And for me as a person of faith, it's also the value of our faith. So I think it is similar to the right, but my experience of the right is usually, at least I feel, that they're demanding that I believe as they do and that they know the way. I think I know some answers, but where I really think we believe that we can really come together is in having a significant dialogue about the way forward. It's a little different.
Mm-hmm. All right, so from a Catholic perspective, what's wrong with the Republican budget proposals put out by Congressman Paul Ryan, himself a Catholic, or does the Catholic perspective not play into this?
Oh, the Catholic perspective does play into it in this one, and our bishops themselves have said that the Ryan budget fails the basic moral test. And quite frankly, his most recent budget has even gotten worse than the one he did back in 2012. So the problem is he's not putting the needs of those who live at the economic margins, the vulnerable, the poor, at the center of his decision making. In fact, he's claiming that the programs that serve the most needy in our society, we have to cut them because we don't have enough money. While at the same moment, he wants to take the savings from those cuts and give them to further tax breaks at the top. Not only that, but he's also got what we call tax extenders, tax deductions for the most profitable corporations in the United States. And he's saying, oh, we can afford that. The latest one that just set me off was I believe it's about $600 billion in tax breaks over 10 years to these wealthy corporations, many of whom pay no taxes at all. And we're going to give them money without offsetting at all in any other program. And then in the very same conversation on Capitol Hill in the Ways and Means Committee in the House, they refused $1 million cost for kids from foster care, leaving foster care at age 18, to get necessary ID as adults. They said we couldn't afford to provide foster kids with what they need to live as adults in our society. Can you believe that? That's wrong. And so the Paul Ryan budget that preferences the top, the 0.1%, preferences large corporations and hurts those who struggle most and support our society from the bottom up, then that's not in keeping with Catholic social teaching. That's not what Jesus is about. That's not what faith is about. He's wrong on that one.
And he's not listening to Pope Francis, who has said trickle down doesn't
Economics
work,
doesn't work.
And that's exactly what he's proposing here. So.
Exactly. He's proposing more of what doesn't work. This is how we've gotten in this huge skewed income and wealth disparity in our nation, is because of this idea of trickle down. We're now 30, 40 years into it, and we can see vividly that it failed miserably. There is no trickle. The only thing is a gush to the top. 95% of the recovery in this economy has gone to the top 1%. 95%. While wages have been flat. That's wrong. That is wrong in the richest nation on earth, that those who help create the wealth for those at the top don't get to participate in it. We've got to change our policies.
Well, and there's something you said just then, too. The wealthiest nation in the world, and yet we have so many people out of work, out of food, out of housing. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense on any level.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there are so many are hardworking. Well, I mean, most of the folks that I meet are hardworking folks. Many are working 2, 3 jobs. I met this one couple over at Union Station here in D.C., and it's a woman in her late 20s, her husband, and she told me they live with her mother-in-law and their son, who's 2.5, in a studio apartment. They're all working really low-wage jobs, all 3 of the adults. Her husband is working 2 jobs. And if he could get a raise, then he could quit one of his jobs in order to spend more time with his family. I mean, these people are desperate to get by. And yet we, as the richest nation on earth, can't pay a living wage to families. We say we value families, but not enough to let parents be with their kids. This is wrong. This is just plain wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, if it's important to follow the Vatican's and the bishops' proclamations on economic justice issues, immigration, for example, why shouldn't Catholics on the left side of the political spectrum give equal weight to teachings on things like contraception and abortion?
Well, I think the thing that on contraception and abortion, we value all of life. The issue is the political consequences of it. And for me, with abortion, I mean, I'm pro-life, but I don't believe in criminalizing abortion because I'm old enough to remember horror stories of women, desperate, fearful women who went to back alley abortionists in a terrible situation and either, got seriously ill, died. I mean, all those terrible stories. So I don't think that's a pro-life stance either. So what I would rather do is what the Pope recommends in the exhortation is to support women in their pregnancy. And it's interesting to note that France has a very different approach to this. France has abortion that's available, that's legal, but they have worked very hard to provide services to pregnant women, healthcare, housing, reasonable cost childcare, as well as 1 year paid maternity leave for the mother to bond with the child. And they have a much lower abortion rate because of it. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It often comes down to economics as opposed to our political football that we want to make it either as an organizing issue for the left or the right. I would rather spend my energy focused on getting women the help they need. Let's be real. Let's be pro-life, not pro-birth.
We're speaking with Sister Simone Campbell, Executive Director of Network, also the author of the new book, A Nun on the Bus, How All of Us Can Create Hope, Change, and Community. Should elected leaders who are Catholic obey the Pope and U.S. bishops on economic policy matters?
Well, I think what they have to do is they have to look at the policies that are being lifted up and then see how they measure up with faith, and then how do we apply them best in the political setting. You'll notice Pope Francis doesn't give he says what doesn't work, but he doesn't give a prescription about how we get out of the mess we're in. That's up to the politicians and the citizens or the residents of our country to figure out what is the best way forward. But what he does do is point out the moral consequence of what's happening. Morally, we are in a big hole because we are not caring for those who are left out. We're not taking care of those folks who create the wealth. We're not taking care of the people Jesus cares about. And so what we have to do is take that admonition to heart and then figure out, what do we do with it? How do we go forward? And Republicans can do this as much as Democrats. Too often we think it's just a Democrat issue, but really Republicans, it's important that we get business involved in this conversation, that business pays a living wage, that business hires folks, that business creates jobs because jobs are essential, and that we deal with some of the latent racism in our society. All that stuff is hard work, but there's no prescription for the way forward. But it is a mandate that we engage at the heart of the gospel if we're going to be Catholics, if we're going to be Christians. So that's what our leadership is trying to do, usually.
Yeah. Do you think the words and actions of Pope Francis will change political attitudes in America on the issues that you advocate?
Is it a magic wand? No, it isn't. But what I think is happening is because people see his authenticity, that they're taking a deeper look at what he's saying. And I think that's something that all politicians in our country can learn. I think all of us can learn, is if we live authentically what we preach, what we talk about, then our speaking has greater power and greater impact. I mean, the fact that Pope Francis said, "Oh, I'm not going to live in that palace. I'm just going to live at the hotel." I mean, isn't that huge? That I'm going to eat in the cafeteria. I'm not going to eat by myself. That he calls people on his cell phone. That he drives himself around the Vatican. I mean, all of that is so authentically him that then I think that has a power of leadership also that people listen to. So I think it's really style becomes really important for moving forward. It's not the totality of teaching, but it certainly is the nourishment of the heart and the spirit.
I don't know how anybody can take on the challenge of getting our current Congress to actually do what you're talking about, and that is, live and breathe what you're speaking. And I just don't think any of them can do that right now.
Well, I think it's extremely hard for them to do it because they're so caught in a game of gotcha politics, and it requires putting the concerns of the American people at the center of their decision-making and not the new game of politics. And the fact that we have a 24-hour news cycle, the fact that we've got folks always out for points, that we think of this as a sporting event. And this is one of the things I talk about in the book is just that I think what we've got to do is recover the idea of civil obligations. We have civil rights. We have a right to vote. We have a right to participate. We have a right to be involved. But more importantly, we have an obligation to be involved. And civil obligations include making sure that everyone is involved, everyone votes, everyone is at the table, and we use our voices to solve our problems. And if we the people start doing that, maybe Congress will follow our lead. That's my hope. That's why we go out on the bus. That's why we lift up all the folks that we do, is because it's we the people that are going to make the difference.
I think you might need a bigger bus.
A whole train of them.
Exactly.
I'd love it. I'd love it.
Exactly.
That'd be great.
Sister Simone Campbell, Catholic sister in the Sisters of Social Service community. She is the executive director of Network and the author of A Nun on the Bus, How All of Us Can Create Hope, Change, and Community. Sister, as always, wonderful to have you with us today on americasdemocrats.org, and we look forward to doing it again soon.
Great. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you. You as well. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Former Congressman Mike Barnes, now a foreign policy scholar, defends President Obama's foreign policy and says if John McCain had been elected, we'd be in a new war every 3 weeks. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Oklahomans have been socked with a surprise from their own supposedly conservative state officials. Thousands of Sooners have been putting solar panels on their homes to save on energy costs and reduce fossil fuel pollution. Switching to solar even allows them to generate excess electricity, which they can transmit back to the grid and earn a credit on their monthly bills. To reward such common sense and socially beneficial energy innovation, the state's Republican-controlled government slapped a new fee, actually a tax, on the bills of those who convert from grid takers to grid producers in the future. This crude slap in the face came with no advance notice, no public hearings, and no legislative debate. It just appeared out of nowhere, said one local solar business owner. But this was not from nowhere. It came from a secretive corporate front group called ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. In exchange for getting millions of dollars from the Koch brothers, utilities, and other dirty energy interests, ALEC is peddling a cookie-cutter bill from state to state that stops homeowners from switching to solar by taxing the energy they produce. ALEC even adds insult to the injury its Koch-headed backers are doing by calling such homeowners free riders on the system. Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin, who was in on this despicable sneak attack from the start, had her ego stroked by the Koch finance front group last year. ALEC presented its Thomas Jefferson Freedom Award to Fallin for her, quote, record of advancing free markets and individual liberty. This is Jim Hightower saying, now we know what the Koch-ALEC complex means by free markets and liberty. They mean that corporate energy interests should be free to stifle your individual liberty. Thomas Jefferson would be ashamed to have his name attached to anything that this cabal of corporate and governmental kleptocrats come up with.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Former Congressman Mike Barnes, a foreign policy expert, says it's less important how the United States or China reacts to Russia's aggression than how Europe reacts. And we say hello to former Congressman Mike Barnes of Maryland, who chaired the Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere Affairs and was a member of the Kissinger Commission on Central America. Subsequent to his congressional service, he has practiced law and served as president of the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. He is currently a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Mike Barnes, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Good to be with you this morning.
Nice to have you with us again as well. All foreign policy eyes have been on Ukraine for some time now, of course. How did the West allow Russia to become so aggressive? I mean, were we asleep at the wheel on this?
Well, I'm not sure we allowed anything. I have a feeling they were going to do this. You know, it's not always about us.
Yeah.
I think there was some naivete, perhaps, in the Bush administration with respect to Russia. We all remember President Bush saying, I looked into Putin's eyes and I saw his soul and I know this is a good man, you know. Well, Putin's a KGB thug, and I don't think most people have been terribly naive about that. And when he took, he sent his troops in and took part of Georgia, that was a pretty good reminder of his thinking about the world around Russia. So I'm not sure we've been asleep at the switch as much as they've been doing their thing.
Was it inevitable?
I think to some degree it was inevitable when that kind of leadership took hold in Russia. It didn't have to happen, I guess, in the sense that democracy in Russia could have taken a different path. But tragically, really tragically for the people of Russia and for the people of the region around Russia, this is the path they're on. And I think it was somewhat inevitable when Putin became the leader.
Mm-hmm. Now, President Obama has come under a great deal of criticism for supposedly inviting Russia's expansion by not having lived up to his words in Syria and elsewhere. Is that fair criticism?
I think that's basically nonsense. Again, this is not about us.
Yeah.
You know, we Americans tend to think everything in the world that happens is either because we did something or because we didn't do something. Putin was on this path. And in fact, we've had from America's national interest perspective, we've had a pretty good situation in Syria. Obama got what he wanted. It took diplomacy to achieve it, but the dismantling of the weapons of mass destruction program in Syria is happening. This was what he said was his required, red line in the sand. So I don't think the criticism has been fair, and I really again think it goes back to this thought that people in Washington believe everything is either our fault because we didn't do something or because we did something. This is again a case where it's not much we could have done differently, unless people want to send in troops and start more wars, which. I'm awfully glad we have a president who's not eager to do that.
Yeah, well, and I mean that's it. When you listen to some of the critics, that's kind of the other option that they're talking about without actually saying it, and I find that somewhat ludicrous. We're speaking.
Yeah, you think if John McCain had been elected president, we'd be in a new war every 3 weeks, given his rhetoric. And we should all be glad that didn't happen, and that we have a president who's calm and reasonable and rational and thinking about American interests. He's certainly willing to use force when necessary. Ask Osama bin Laden whether this president will be tough when it's called upon, or the hundreds and hundreds of other people who've been killed by drones on the order of this president of the United States. So he's not some weakling sitting back, whining. I'm not going to do anything.
Right. Yeah.
That's nonsense. It's nonsense.
We're speaking with former Maryland Congressman Mike Barnes, currently senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. So what do you think Vladimir Putin's endgame really is? And is he someone we should deal with? Do we have any choice at this point?
I don't think we have a lot of choice but to face up to the reality of what's going on in Russia. And I think his endgame seems to be fairly clear, and that is to reestablish a Russian sphere of influence in that whole region, the old Soviet Union, unless we're prepared to go to war, it's going to be difficult to stop actions in places like Ukraine. Now, it's different for countries that have joined NATO. We've made very clear, and NATO has made very clear, that it's not going to accept any fooling around with Poland or other NATO members.
Are we back in a Cold War, and is that not inevitable when you have two such large superpowers colliding over territory, energy, and economics?
I think this is different in the sense that I don't believe there's any real threat of the use of nuclear weapons over any of these issues. So I think we're in a different kind of conflict now than we were during the so-called Cold War, but it's serious, and we need to recognize that Russia's only going to play ball when it thinks it's very much in its interest, and that should be our posture, and I think it is.
Now, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons after it became independent. Does the West now have an obligation to put the country under its nuclear umbrella?
No, we don't have a treaty obligation to do that, and I personally believe it would be unwise for us to be threatening Russia with nuclear weapons over these actions. I think the president has been responsible and cautious and appropriately responding with the kinds of sanctions that can have real impact over time on both the Russian economy and individuals, Putin and the people around him. They can be hit pretty hard by these sanctions that are being put in place, and that's the appropriate response in my view.
Is it then just a matter of how much they can take before something bends, breaks, or whatever it is?
Well, I think reality is that Russia is going to exert some influence on its immediate neighbors. We've seen that in Georgia. We're seeing it in Ukraine. This is the real world. But that doesn't mean that we're back into a confrontation that might lead to nuclear conflict.
Mm-hmm. What about the Chinese? Do they have a role to play in any of this?
I hope not.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be constructive. The one reality with respect to our relationship with China right now in terms of confrontation is their disagreements with Japan over some of the islands over there, and we're hoping they don't get the same idea that the Russians have had in Georgia and Ukraine. That could only make life more miserable for the President of the United States. I don't know how the guy sleeps at night with all of these challenges in the world. Oh
yeah, you know what? Not in a million years would I want to trade places with him. That's
no,
for sure.
Indeed.
So if you're calling the shots, do you just keep going with the sanctions? Just keep this track that President Obama is on in dealing with Putin and the situation in Ukraine? Do you just kind of stay the line and just hope something eventually happens?
Well, cranking up the sanctions is not just staying the line. Part of the problem that the United States has had is that the Europeans are less eager to implement really tough economic sanctions than we are, because it will have a more direct, immediate impact on their economies. They get so much of their energy from Russia and
right.
other trade as well. So they're nervous about doing things that will undermine them. They're already fairly fragile economies. You know, unemployment in Europe, in the European Union, is close to 12%. So doing anything that raises economic costs to them is tough. And again, this is not just about us. You know, it's not just the United States and Russia. Probably more important is how the Europeans are prepared to respond to it than how we respond to it.
And perhaps we need to be talking to them and encouraging them to do more. I don't know.
Well, Chancellor Merkel was recently in Washington, and clearly we're in constant contact, the U.S. government is, with all of our allies in Europe on this issue, and encouraging them to be as tough as they can be, because it's the only reasonable response to what's going on.
Okay, well, we'll just have to keep an eye on things. Former Maryland Congressman Mike Barnes joining us today, currently senior fellow at the Center for International Policy here on americasdemocrats.org. Congressman, thank you as always for your time. We look forward to doing it again with you soon.
Thank you. I'll look forward to it.
Okay, and this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Senator Bob Casey of Pennsylvania.
Joining us in studio, another great public servant from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, Senator Bob Casey. Senator, good to see you.
Bill, good to be with you.
I'm glad the Senate is working this week. I mean, we're getting something for our tax dollars, right? And, of course, still with us as a friend of Bill this entire hour, host of the Julie Mason show on the POTUS channel, of press pool. I'm sorry.
You can rebrand it right here. Let's just call it the Julie Mason Show.
Or the press pool with Julie Mason on the POTUS channel, Sirius XM. Hey, Julie.
Hey, Bill.
Have you with us? So the Senate.
Good to be with you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, you stayed here this week, Senator. So what has the Senate accomplished this week?
Well, we're working right now on the a tax bill. It's a 2-year extension of a lot of tax provisions, which is a measure that came out of our committee, the Finance Committee, unanimously. So we're not there yet. It's not done yet, but we're working on that. It's unfortunate that
Getting rid of any of those tax loopholes?
it's not there. It's not quite there, but it does have a number of measures that help on research and development to have that tax credit in place. A lot of small business tax credit, so it's got good support on both sides. Getting that done is essential, I think, for the economy. Unfortunately, the week started off on a bad note when the energy bill went down, and I hope we can get back to that because energy efficiency is a great way to get savings, but also to get savings in a way that's consistent with our environmental concerns.
Well, that's a strange story because it was Jeanne Shaheen from New Hampshire,
right,
and the Republican
Rob Portman,
right. So it's a bipartisan bill coming together, you would think, on something which should not be a partisan issue. It's energy efficiency, saving money, creating jobs and everything. And with that kind of bipartisan support, what happened to it? Why couldn't the Senate pass that?
Well, look, there's a big debate about how we got to where we are, but our side for weeks now has been saying to Republicans, okay, you guys want a series of amendments, let's talk about it. And Harry Reid and our leadership, including Jeanne Shaheen as the leader of the bill, agreed to have a series of votes on different amendments. And the Republicans kept moving the goalposts, saying, well, okay, we want this vote. Well, no, we changed our mind. We want that vote. And it reached a point where we just couldn't get an agreement to move forward. I don't think that means it's the end of the conversation. This is our second attempt in about a year, a little less than a year maybe, to get this bill done. But it's unfortunate. I think it's symptomatic of some of the other problems here in Washington.
Was Keystone one of the amendments that the Republicans wanted to, Keystone Pipeline?
They started out as a sense of the Senate on that, and then they moved to wanting to have a substantive vote. But it became, I think it just became, and they're going to, we hope that they won't try to amendment away the next measure, which is the tax bill, because a lot of their members will criticize Harry Reid about the process, all the while hoping that we can get it done. So some of them get to have their cake and eat it too. They get to criticize, but then in the end get to benefit from the passage of the legislation.
Minimum wage is one issue in which the Senate did finally get together, right? Not that we've seen any action.
In terms of a vote, yeah.
In terms of a vote.
Right.
No action in the House on that issue. Do you think we're going to? I mean, I don't understand the opposition. Today is the latest protest on behalf of fast food workers around the country.
Right.
150 different cities today. Fast food workers going to be out and their supporters in front of these establishments and saying you can't survive on $7.25. Who could? Right, an hour. But I don't understand the opposition. Even who is it, Julie? Mitt Romney. And Rick Santorum came out and said, "Come on, what are you doing? So let's, as Republicans, let's support the raising the minimum wage."
Well, it's the right thing to do to support a raise in the minimum wage, and I'm glad that on their side there are some voices that are saying they support it. I'm really skeptical, though, that saying you support the minimum wage sounds good, but if you come out and say, "Well, let's raise it from $7.25 to some low number above that," that's easy. So you get the benefit of public approval by saying I'm for it. So that's what I'm afraid. And I hope if Governor Romney or Rick Santorum, someone I ran against in 2006, and this issue was a big issue in our 2006 campaign, by the way, he had voted.
Where was he then?
Oh, he had voted against it a number of times. I think he might have. I think he had a kind of, as I recall, kind of a mixed record. Voted sometimes for it, sometimes against it. But it was a big issue, and I was pushing it very hard. But look, if they're for it, that's great. But if they're going to be with us and with the people that should benefit from this. By the way, about 15 million women in the workforce, almost between 14 and 15 million children. So it's really about women in the workforce and kids mostly. in terms of who would directly benefit. But if they're with us, they'll be for $10.10 an hour in 95% increases over 3 years. And look, even if we got to 10.10 3 years from now, right now the inflation, if we had started in, say, 1968 and it kept up with inflation, it'd be more than $10.50 an hour.
Oh, yeah. Right. It'd be a lot higher.
Right.
It's just insane.
Senator Patty Murray said yesterday that a lot of what the Senate needs to do this year is getting pushed off to the lame duck. What's coming up after the election?
Well, I think there's some of that, and it's natural. For example, I would hope we could move forward on tax reform. I think it's needed. It's essential to simplify the code and make it fairer and do a lot of things that would help.
Can you do that in 2 months, though?
No. but we have to keep momentum going so that when you have a window of opportunity, you don't have to kind of ramp up quickly. Kind of keep the engine running so that you can move quickly. But that's one of those big issues that'll probably have to wait until the period. I tend to think of it as not just lame duck or post-election, but some of these issues we hope, if the window is even larger than just the end of 14, maybe into 15. But I think that's true. There's a natural reluctance, and I think a natural reluctance on the part of some to wait till after the election. I do think some Republicans are feeling confident, so they figure they can kind of wait things out until after the election.
Yeah.
Well, things kind of look like they're going their way, though.
Well, although I think if you look at these Senate races race by race instead of looking at the broader picture, if you just looked at the 6 year of a president and their track record, and then you looked at the right direction, wrong track number, or things like that, or people's feelings about the economy, you think, wow, we're in pretty tough shape. But when you look at, in the Senate at least, race by race or state by state, it looks a lot better. I mean, states where we should be way down, we're either tied or a little ahead, and in some cases more than a few points ahead. So it's gonna be a tough year, but I think we have a good chance to retain the Senate.
It's interesting that a couple of days ago, Jennifer Duffy was our guest from the Cook Political Report. I'm sure she's been on your show many times too. And we went through the Senate races, as many as we could, in a half an hour, race by race by race. And in every one of the ones that we know about, the big, high-profile ones, Cook Political Report right now rates them toss up, toss up, toss up, toss up, toss up. I mean, so underscoring your point, they're not decided for sure, but you can't say at this point that it's clearly, definitely going to be a Republican blowout. I mean, she says it's like 50-50.
They should be in a much more commanding position because when you think of the states, we're talking about a lot of red states. I mean, states that the president lost by double digits, sometimes 20 points, were in a dead heat. And I think Cook is one of those organizations that, I mean, they don't just get happy talk.
No,
to make you feel better.
No.
They're pretty analytical. So,
it's interesting to look, for example, in New Hampshire, where President Obama's approval rating is about 36%, right? And Scott Brown is trailing Jeanne Shaheen. Mm-hmm. He should be doing better.
Right.
Senator, to Julie's point about some of these things being put off, there's also, I keep hearing from people that immigration reform, we've put it off, but for the Republicans in the House even, let us get through the primaries and get those Tea Party challengers behind us, and then we're ready to do immigration reform. Now, the Senate has acted. Do you think really there's any hope? Julie's shaking her head no.
Was he supposed to tell the audience that you were shaking your head? No. Look, I hope that's part of their calculation, because that means we might actually get some kind of a breakthrough. But I think House and Senate Republicans make a big mistake if they think, let's just hold off until the end of 14 and then we'll fix it right before the 2016 election. I think I'd call it a high wire act, and they could fall because they're already heading for a terribly difficult 2016 presidential and maybe even 2020 because of a number of issues, including immigration. They would be a lot better. I'm just talking pure politics here. They would be better off working with us and working with that incredible number and consensus that we got in the Senate, where you had 8 senators coming together on a bipartisan bill, and it passed the Senate overwhelmingly. So I think they're making a big mistake by constantly pushing away people. They need to build a bigger coalition.
Well, again, some Republican voices lately have made that point.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham did a few years ago, but recently Jeb Bush, what was it he called it?
An act of love, or
immigration, right? Coming here, talk about separating yourself from the pack, right?
So Bush family, right?
Exactly. What a treat to have in studio with us, Julie Mason here as a friend of Bill, a great friend. Host of the Julie Mason Show. Do you think they mind that we just changed their programming?
No, not at all, Bill.
Okay.
Whatever you say.
On the POTUS channel, of course, on Sirius XM, and public United States Senator, public servant, United States Senator from Pennsylvania, Senator Bob Casey. Senator, great to have you in studio. You see how close we are to the Capitol now. There's no excuse for not stopping by.
Run over anytime.
It's a really cool part of Pennsylvania Avenue.
No, it's a great part of town. So just stop by on your way to work any morning.
I guess technically we were right just off Pennsylvania Avenue, but we're in the neighborhood. It's nice.
Yeah, good to have you with us. Talking about things that Congress. There are actually some issues on which we might be able to see some progress, and both parties might come together. The ABLE Act, your legislation. Tell us about it.
It's a great bill, and the reason we've got such great support in the Senate, we've got more than 70 co-sponsors. No other bill has that. The House has, I don't know the exact number, but it's over 350. And it's really simple. We've had, as part of our tax law for years, the ability to save for college, so-called 529 plans. This would be a 529 plan for families that have an individual with a disability. So if your child is born with Down syndrome, you can begin to save in a tax-free manner, not be penalized.
Yeah,
we were talking about you as a grandfather. We heard a story recently where a grandparent had a Down syndrome grandson or daughter, I'm not sure which, from Pennsylvania, and this person said, I wanted to put money in the account on a birthday. Instead of giving them a present or a toy, give them money into account. And they were advised not to, because if it builds up too big, you can be penalized. You could lose SSI or Medicaid coverage. So this is a way to allow them to save in a tax-free manner. So you can build it up over time, and then when that child becomes an adult, it might be in the workforce, might need an apartment, might need money for transportation. They can get to work, or they can get education or training, and have that even if their parents years later have passed away. And that's the real fear of a lot of parents, is they care for this child all those years and sometimes decades, and then they worry that when they're gone, that person won't be able to support themselves.
What happens to them?
So it's a great bill. We have people on left, right, and middle supporting it, all four caucuses. So it could be a good moment in Washington when we get this done.
Has it passed the Senate?
Has not. We hope to get it through both chambers in June. That's what we're working on. So we need some good news here.
Absolutely, no.
It's one of those rare things where it's the right thing to do. It'll have a seismic impact on millions of families, and it's actually bipartisan.
No, congratulations.
Senator, you mentioned that you had a lot of grassroots support for that.
Yeah, it's remarkable. I mean, look, I'd like to pat legislators on the back. That's nice, but
not in this room.
The people, pretty dangerous to do that. The people who made this work were staffs in all four caucuses, number one. And number two, people at the grassroots level, so many advocates and families. Families that have, the Down Syndrome Society itself, but then individual families that I met in Pennsylvania and across the country. A lot of folks in the autism community who have been pushing for this for years and have made it a priority. And I think until that happened, there was legislative support, but the intensity, the momentum was created from those families.
Boy, that's really great. It's great to see this accomplishment. Congratulations, Senator.
We're not there yet, but we're in the...
Don't jinx him.
All right.
We got to get it over the goal line. We're working hard to do that.
All right, now let's get down and dirty here for the last minute or so that we've got. Who's the next governor of Pennsylvania?
The Democratic nominee.
Oh, all right.
No, we have a primary...
Right. Who's the Democratic nominee?
We have a primary Tuesday, and I have not endorsed anyone.
This is a good opportunity to do
so.
Yeah,
I could do that. I don't think they really were too worried about getting endorsements from senators, but in these days it may not be that helpful. But I'm only half kidding there. No,
is there a clear front runner?
There are four candidates that are all very strong. All of them I know. They're incredibly talented. Katie McGinty worked for Governor Rendell. She worked for President Clinton, Vice President Gore. Really capable person. Rob McCord, state treasurer, in the second term as state treasurer, someone I've known for years. Not as longer than Katie, but I've known Katie as well. Allison Schwartz, of course, a member of the House here.
Right.
Has had a great career in both the state Senate and now in the House since, I guess, 2004. And then Tom Wolf, who's a businessman from York, Pennsylvania, put a lot of money into the race. The polling, the latest polling, the public polls show him ahead by double digits. I don't know where it will end up. Primaries can be sometimes difficult to predict because the turnout when you have a lot of it depends on turnout. Field. Here's the interesting news, though, that in all the polling, when they match each candidate up against Governor Corbett, each of them are either ahead or tied with him, and some are ahead by more than just a few points. That in and of itself is remarkable. It means we have a very good chance, and I think a high likelihood of winning the general election, which is astounding in our state, because in our state, like a lot of states, once a governor gets elected, it's very hard to dislodge them. So could be a big win this year. We got to work hard to get there.
We got to be watching this, Julie. I had a debate the other day between some friends as to who was the worst governor in the country. Was it Governor Corbett of Pennsylvania or Governor LePage from Maine? So
why are you putting Rick Scott out of contention?
Oh,
Rick Perry, you haven't even mentioned him.
But
We're here for an hour.
It's interesting. A lot of this, and this is it's not that attenuated. A lot of these governor's races and legislative races, I think a lot of people here, members of Congress and others, are realizing that if we don't do a good job in our states electing Democratic governors, Democratic legislatures, we get killed in reapportionment 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road. And it's one of the reasons why you have kind of Tea Party dominance in the House.
Bingo. That's why these midterm elections are so important. On that note, thank you so much, Senator
Bill,
Casey,
thank you. Great to be with you.
Nice to be with you.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Simone Campbell, Mike Barnes, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate.